Welcome back, everyone, to the Greatest Showdown broadcast for your unbeaten Ninkata. Today marks week 3 of the inaugural season, and Coach Highjumpsean is sitting tied atop the standings. The Ninkata are facing off against fellow unbeaten Coach FistToYourDoom and his Super Bash Bros. Coach Sean and the Ninkata are looking to continue their solid start going into this week. So before we get to the kickoff, let's take a look at today's starting lineups presented to you by PokeHub. Starting off with Coach FistToYourDoom's team. In first position, he has his ace, his captain, his Terra captain for the squad, the new Gouging Fire. This Paradoxmon is obviously going to be a major threat for Sean's team, whatever type it chooses to be, but it opts to go with its stab typing of fire to hopefully set ablaze and open up Sean's defensive open up the defensive backbone a little bit more and make this easier for his other offense to make way. Speaking of the other offense, his second position is guarded by Iron Bundle. Typically a fraudulent mon without the Terra ability, but he opts to go with it. It's a very good speed tier here for FistToYourDoom. It'd be interesting to see how he uses the Water Ice type in this matchup. Next up in third position, probably what Coach Sean argues is, outside of Gouging Fire, the most annoying Pokemon on this team, Zapdos. Zapdos, the legendary Pokemon from Generation 1, is obviously going to put up major problems defensively and even offensively, as Sean has explained a lot that his team feels very weak to just solid electric types. They're able to just do whatever they want and volt for free, given that his ground type is Iron Shreds. And he has no grass type, so he has no other resists to the electric typing, and his dragon is obviously part flying as well. So Zapdos can prove to be a big problem here. And in his fourth position, he's got another Ogerpon form. He played one last week in the Teal Mask variant. Did not come, but this time the Ogerpon does come with the Wellspring Mask form. Obviously, the water grass typing, kind of in the similar vein to the electric typing, he doesn't really have a solid resist to water typing, and these double waters plus the electric going to pose a really big problem to his defensive core. And offensively, it's going to be very hard to revenge the likes of Bundle, Ogerpon, and Zapdos, as well as the Gouging Fire. Sean obviously had to prepare for, a multitude of types, and I don't think Fire was one that he was expecting. But we'll see how Ogerpon can fare. Has a very solid speed tier here. The only thing that outspeeds it is Tornadus Therian. In fifth position, he's got Donphan, the remover of the team, the only remover of the team, actually. Oh, I guess Iron Bundle can remove as well, but Donphan, the primary remover of this team, also sets up rocks here. Probably going to be the rocker in this matchup, as we see another mon that learns rocks is on the bench. But Donphan going to do what it needs to do: set up rocks and spin, maybe knockoff. Really, all it's going to need to do from this nostalgic elephant. And in the last position, he brought his second Terra captain here. It's actually the Mabostiff, the Dark type, and it's going to have the Terra Dark ability on its in its arsenal. Mabostiff's going to be a very interesting Pokemon here, and I'm curious to see how FistToYourDoom is going to use it in this matchup. Probably, I think Coach Sean has mentioned that he said that Mabostiff could come, and it has a decent matchup versus him, as he has no fairy type on his team, and his only dark resists are low kicks and overquill. Could see Mabostiff potentially being a problem, especially for that Deoxys defense that Sean has been relying on a whole lot. And sitting on the bench, a pretty powerful Pokemon here that he's still left on the bench: Metagross, Snorlax, and Sylveon. Sylveon, obviously a nice fairy typing that could, along with Metagross and the fast ice type, could pose a big problem for Sean's Dragonite if he opts to bring it here, as it kind of forces the coverage a little bit thin. And I wonder how Sean's going to be able to handle, not just the Zapdos, but, these Spadef Pokemon in Snorlax and Sylveon, given that his best, especially offensive mons, are going to be like Rotom Wash and Tornadus Therian, both of which can kind of get handled pretty well by Zapdos. So, and the water types both can hit Rotom Wash pretty well. So be very interesting to see how Sean handles this matchup. But that is the lineup for FistToYourDoom. And let's just briefly cover the Coach Sean's lineup here for week number 3. And as we have it in the first position, Revavroom, the saving grace from last week outside of Iron Shreds, didn't have to Terra at all, but it's back with a Terra Poison for a boosted stab attack here. Revavroom leading the charge. Interesting to see what Sean brings for it this week, but Revavroom, ladies and gentlemen, rev your engines. Basically, the engine of our team is back and sitting atop in the position. Second position belongs to Deoxys Defense, the defensive backbone, one that supports everything for this team. The spiker that Sean loves to use here. Deoxys Defense is back, and it's going to be interesting to see what Sean uses it in this matchup, as defensively it seems a little bit outclassed against some of the offense like Gouging Fire and Ogerpon. In the third position, he has Overquill. Overquill making back-to-back appearances here. And Overquill with that Intimidate is going to be useful against things like Gouging Fire. And even that Mabostiff that ended up coming, and Sean probably decided to cover that with his Dark type here. Very interesting indeed. Overquill going to be able to do what it needs to do and handle some things. And potentially maybe it's the Spiker in this matchup, or might set up Toxic Spikes, as FistToYourDoom has no Poison type. Iron Shreds is here probably to set up rocks and spin, unless Deoxys decides to set up rocks, but Iron Shreds is here, ready to probably be the pivot into Zapdos, and it'd be interesting to see how Sean handles the Zapdos, as that's really his only last line of defense outside of the maybe like a Spadef Deoxys, so it'd be interesting to see how he utilizes Treads in this matchup. In fifth position, the team captain, maybe not necessarily in kills, has probably one of the most amount of deaths on the team, but Tornadus Therian, the god of wins here, just going to be reliable, the fastest mon on the team, helps revenge a lot of the threats on this team, especially that Ogerpon. The only thing that outspeeds it is obviously that Iron Bundle, so it'll be interesting to see how Sean utilizes it on this build. And then lastly, the other Terra Captain, the one that's kind of been forgotten about, and it's making its debut this week. Terra Captain Ceruledge with the Terra Fairy type in here. Going to be interesting to see how Sean utilizes Ceruledge in this matchup. Obviously, the Terra Fairy with the Flash Fire ability, probably his only last line of defense against that Gouging Fire, which he did mention was very difficult to prepare for in terms of figuring out what combo of types it could be and how he can basically handle a multitude of sets. And then rounding out the bench, Mienshao has yet to make its debut, the only Nincada left on this roster that has yet to make a debut. Coach Sean said that this was potentially one of the mons he was going to have on the team, but opted to go a different route. Mienshao, obviously, still going to be taking on the bench role, but its time potentially could come. And then Dragonite, Rotom Wash, and Low Kicks, who've each found the battlefield sometime this season so far, are still rounding it out on the bench. So why don't we just head over to the broadcast, ladies and gentlemen. And we are here for the match here. And FistToYourDoom is lined up on the opposing side, and we see the backside of our Nincada here lined up as they are. And again, Gouging Fire, Terra Fire, and Mabostiff Terra Dark, Revavroom is Terra Poison, and Ceruledge is Terra Fairy. I imagine Sean wants to lead with something like Tornadus, as he always likes to do. He could also lead with something like Deoxys or Treads as well. I expect something of the likes of maybe an Iron Bundle or a Zapdos lead here from FistToYourDoom. So the battle starts here as Sean decides to lead with his Torn, and FistToYourDoom decides to lead with your Zapdos. Obviously not a favorable lead for Sean here, as I assume he's going to have to switch out versus the Zapdos and probably go into that Treads, as Sean does decide to go into his Treads here, and Zapdos goes for a safe Volt Switch, trying not to do anything fancy here. I expect Zapdos would want to stay in and click Heat Wave, and Treads, I'm not sure what the item is or what he wants to do. Could potentially be like an Assault Vest Treads, and he's just going to go for Stone Edge. If it's not a physically defensive Zapdos, Stone Edge will two-shot if it's an offensive Treads here. So it'll be interesting to see what Sean goes for. He's not Assault Vest, as he goes for Rocks, and he is the Aqua Berry, and it does 33% there. So it looks like either this Iron Treads is not max speed F, or this Zapdos is a little bit offensive here. So potentially a Stone Edge could have two-shot from this range, so it'd be very interesting to see what Sean goes for here, unless he's only carrying like an Ice Spinner to cover the Donphan pivot as well. But Sean decides to go for the Stone Edge, and it does do over half, so Stone Edge would have two-shot, and he does get a good roll here, and the Heat Wave knocks out the Treads, and Zapdos sitting at half, and the rocks are up. Interesting to see Sean not decide to go for the Stone Edge right away. Could have pressured out the Zapdos, but I imagine he thought maybe the Donphan would have came in and his rocks would have never been up in the first place, and he would have found it difficult to get his rocks up again. So I don't necessarily blame him for going for the rocks first, as it does look important for revealing items such as Gouging Fire or Iron Bundle, if Iron Bundle is a boosting item here. But I imagine Sean, he doesn't really have a whole lot to revenge this. He could go out into Deoxys, maybe install it out, but that gives Zapdos a free roost. Rev, if it's offensive, could potentially outspeed this, but since it's offensive Zapdos, it could be speed invested, so it just depends on what the Rev is. And if the Rev's like Scarfed or something with Terra Poison, maybe that could be the thing that comes in, but I imagine that would be alright, as well, as the only switch in is the Donphan, but that will give him a free spin unless he tries to predict the Ceruledge. But at this point, Sean decides to go into the Ceruledge, so the Gouging Fire response comes in early, and if Zapdos decides to heal here, it'll be interesting to see what Sean goes for. But if Sean goes for an attack here and kills the Zapdos, that would be pretty big for him, as he ultimately has no switch in to the Tornadus. And this would be a big play for him if the Zapdos were to go down. But I imagine, since it revealed Volt Switch, he would want to Volt Switch here, FistToYourDoom. But he decides to go for a Discharge, a big Discharge here. And wow, it looks like Ceruledge is going to be able to knock this out. But the Poltergeist, it moves to the left. And just like that, oh my goodness, the Zapdos is still around. Oh, that is heartbreaking to see. And it looks like he just goes for another Discharge. Sean finally goes in Deoxys. I think the fact that two-shot the Ceruledge is so bad for him. And look at this, the Deoxys outspeeds the Zapdos here as it goes for a Volt Switch. And a lot of fast plays here, as that miss was huge. Zapdos is still around. Torn can no longer freely just spam its moves. I mean, that would have been huge. The Zapdos would be gone, and this damage on Ceruledge would not have been for nothing. And now this Deoxys is in at around 70%, and this Mabustiff going to be able to pressure. But obviously, Sean has the Overquill. He can pivot into this Mabustiff here, and that was a choice banded crunch based off the damage calcs. And that was a massive amount of damage there. But Overquill goes for the Toxic here, so no Toxic spikes. But the Donphan comes in and it is leftovers. But this is a Black Sludge Toxic Overquill. Potentially maybe like Substitute or Protect on the Overquill as well. But Sean decides to switch into his Torn, probably expecting Rocks or a Rapid Spin here. But the Donphan decides to go for the knockoff. And Torn is Choice Scarfed. And that is a massive piece of information and item removal for FistToYourDoom here, as now the Tornadus lost its Scarf. There's nothing that outspeeds the Iron Bundle unless it's a Terra Poison Scarfed Reverum in the back, but ultimately it looks like Torn needs to do some damage here, and I assume the Donphan's going to want to spin or potentially go for Rocks now that he's knocked off the Torn. Torn goes for Bleak Wind here, as the Donphan does opt to go for the Stealth Rocks here, and now it's at 20%. So this should be good for actually Sean, as he's able to keep up Rocks, and he might be able to get information on Gouging Fire, the Bundle, the Zapdos if it's somehow not Boots, as there's no way to actually tell what the item was, as the Poltergeist ended up flying to the left, and Sean doesn't know necessarily what all the information is going to be, but this is a good chip on things like Ogerpon or Mabustiff, so it'll be very interesting to see. So he should go for another Bleak Wind here, and he misses the Bleak Wind. Does he go for Rapid Spin? And he does. That is huge. That is a huge miss for Sean, as now he can't get this passive chip on some of these mons like Mabustiff and Ogerpon, as well as scout the items on Gouging Fire and Bundle, and that is a massive miss. Sean, I assume, just probably going to go for a U-turn, not expecting Zapdos, and he does. and he's going to try and get a new position here, and he brings in Deoxys, which I assume is going to invite in the Mabelstiff again. And Mabelstiff does come in here, and Sean has to go Overquill, and Mabelstiff has the ability to make a prediction or double out. He does go for the double edge here, and it does a massive amount of damage. And I expect he does just go for the Toxic. He does not. Okay, so Sean does make the read that Mabelstiff is going to switch out because that was banded damage. He expected him to go into the Ceruledge here, FistToYourDoom, and Coach Sean decides to go for a raw Toxic, predicting a swap, and his Iron Bundle takes a Toxic, which is going to be massive for him. And Sean decides to go for a Protect, so he is a Toxic Protect set. Interesting to see if he has Substitute or not, but maybe not. He decides to switch into the Deoxys on the Iron Bundle here, and a Freeze Dry comes out. That's 25%. I would assume then that it is a taunt. Okay, so it's not Specs of some kind. It's not Scarfed, and the Iron Bundle takes a lot of Toxic damage here, and this is actually not that bad. But I'm curious what this Deoxys set is, and here comes the Overquill. I assume he's sacking it to the bundle just to try and rack up Toxic damage, but he does go for U-turn, and the Zapdos comes in for free, and the Zapdos can either be able to Roost or go for a Volt Switch, which it does. And the Gouging Fire, the big threat, decides to come in, and Sean really doesn't have a whole lot. I mean, this was a Scarf Tornadus. It probably doesn't have Taunt. Revavroom can't really handle this that well either. I mean, Deoxys is at 50%. The Ceruledge is going to potentially take rocks if it's not Boots. Sean decides to use Ceruledge, and it does take the rocks. And so I don't know what he's going to be able to do. I mean, he can just attack the Ceruledge and knock it out and avoid any shenanigans. Or the Gouging Fire can just go for an attack here or set up. Sean goes for Endure. Very interesting. So it's probably Weak Armor, not Flash Fire, as he goes for a Dragon Dance. And Sean I think at this point, he knows the game probably is over. He goes for another Endure, but it fails as the Gouging Fire goes for Iron Head and does not knock it out. It was expecting the Terra Fairy there, so it probably... He had to make a read on whether or not it was going to be Flash Fire or not, and like Sean was just playing around it, I guess, but he could have went for Flare Blitz. He probably has a Dragon move maybe, or Ground move. But he decides to go for Iron Head, so he probably was hard reading Terra Fairy in this matchup. And Sean gets the Weak Armor boost, and he's +2 now. And it'll be interesting to see if he actually outspeeds the Gouging Fire here. Gouging Fire is a base, I believe, 91 Mon, and the Ceruledge is base 85. So naturally, the Gouging Fire, if it's max speed, would be able to outpace it at some point with the boosts. But Ceruledge does outspeed at +2 and goes for Destiny Bond. So Endure Destiny Bond, Poltergeist, and I'm interested to see what the last move is. But this Gouging Fire just decides to go for another Dragon Dance, does not care what the Ceruledge is doing. But because of the Destiny Bond being up, this Gouging Fire has to go for another Dragon Dance. So this gives Sean another opportunity to go for something. He goes for Poltergeist. He does not miss it this time. It does 43% to the Gouging Fire. Probably has some bulk, but probably not a whole lot on this Gouging Fire here. As I believe Sean would have to go for an Endure here. He does, and does Fist make the read? He doesn't. He just goes for Iron Head here. Sean opting not to go for a Terastallization here. It looks like Rev is probably his endgame, but this is getting dicey here as Fist is just going to go for Iron Head over and over, and at this point, +2 outsped +1 Gouging Fire, but does +4 outspeed +3 Gouging Fire. Obviously, the percentages are much closer than 1.5 and 2 and 2.5 and 3. This Gouging Fire might just outspeed here and just go for an Iron Head. He has no real reason to go for another Dragon Dance in this situation, as Sean has already endured. So he could just go for the Iron Head here and just knock out the Ceruledge, but he opts to click Dragon Dance again, giving Sean a chance to potentially crit him, or if he has Shadow Sneak as his last move. But given that there's a Snorlax on the other side's bench, I assume it probably is a fighting type move of some kind, or something to hit the Snorlax here. But this is potentially low, and if it was Shadow Sneak, this would be a dire situation for FistToYourDoom risking this. Sean goes for another Endure as FistToYourDoom goes for Scale Shot, obviously getting the hits here, and obviously you're going to see this screen get completely filled up with the amount of hits that this Gouging Fire is doing with its Scale Shot. Gets a 5-hitter here, and that makes me wonder if the Gouging Fire is the loaded dice, which means that those Stealth Rocks being removed off the Bleakwood Miss is going to be massive here if it was a loaded dice Gouging Fire. And again, that these misses are pretty big here, as the Zapdos would be gone. Positionally, it would not have affected, been able to position itself to get the Gouging Fire in. And the Gouging Fire, if it is non-boots, would have taken rocks here. So a pretty massive early game, making this end game a bit tougher here, as Sean would have been able to take out this Gouging Fire in 2 hits, but instead is at the mercy of just praying that he outspeeds this Gouging Fire, which he does not, as I would assume based off of the multipliers. But Sean has to go into his Revavroom here, and it looks like a GG. I mean, there's not much else he can do versus this Gouging Fire. It's a menace. I mean, he's got to pray that it somehow has Flare Blitz in its arsenal. Being a Terra Fire set, Sean is going to have to bank on a Flare Blitz here and hope and pray that he clicks it and dies to recoil. Or you can just opt to stay in and just pray he goes for like a Scale Shot of some kind potentially, and just attacks and takes it out. But at this point, I don't know if Sean can win the game. He would need Revavroom set up and this Gouging Fire gone. Sean does opt to sack the Deoxys. He is baiting the Flare Blitz here as Fist Terras into Terra Fire, but he goes for Scale Shot. Okay, so that would not have knocked out the Revavroom here, and a pretty big play for Fist, as he just decides to either he has no Flare Blitz or he just opted to make the call there. Very interesting play as he decides to go Rev, and I believe Sean would have to go and bait the Flare Blitz again and sack the Torn. It's his only play, and based off the end game, the Deoxys outsped the Zapdos here, so maybe Rev can outspeed it, and it'll just come down to whether or not the taunts with Bundle versus Rev, or what the Ogerpon item moveset is. It could be Taunt or Encore itself. Mabelstiff, it has speed. I mean, it is an adamant nature based off the calcs, so it'll be interesting to see what the Rev does here. And at this point, I think he has to bait the Flare Blitz, but I would assume he might have gone for it at this point if he had it. Maybe his last move is Morning Sun or Earthquake here, but he does stay in. He just expects it to not have Flare Blitz, and Revavroom dies, and so does the Gouging Fire. And at this point, Sean needed Rev in order to win the game. It basically feels like he conceded by just sacking. I guess Sean had kind of just gave up at the end, and Zapdos, which should not have been around, obviously cleans up the game here. But a pretty devastating loss for the Nincada. Obviously a 4-0 loss here, but a lot of factors didn't play out there positionally to give him information with the rocks and the missed Bolter on the Zapdos. I feel like potentially if he got that Flare Blitz play right, the Revavroom had a shot there in the end game. Very unfortunate for the Nincada, but there's still 5 weeks left in the season. Surely we can be a little bit more fortunate and maybe not rely so much on those type of end games. But obviously the Gouging Fire matchup was going to be as volatile as it was, and it looks like Coach Highjumpsean is not too pleased. There were some expletives stated down on the field during that first early part of the game, so he is going to be denying the presser, and he said he'll save it for next week. And he says he needs to kind of just let the anger run out. Obviously, he put a lot of effort into this build for this week. The squad going into this they prepared very well, and he feels he wasn't really afforded a great opportunity in the early game to make well with the position, but he tried his best to make a comeback there. If he just got the Flare Blitz play right, he had a shot there in the end. But obviously, it looks like his upsetness kind of got the best of him, and he kind of conceded there to the Gouging Fire. Saved himself some differential anyways, but a bit unfortunate. But hopefully we can bounce back next week. I believe we play Burger for week number 4. and Coach Highjumpsean can come in with a little more of a level head. Obviously busy IRL with a lot of other things on the side, but Coach Sean's going to put his all every single week. So we'll see you guys next week for the TGS here for the Long Beach Linkada.